We continue the study of the Tariag Mitzvot. And we're up to the 177th Mitzvah, and that's the law of Nig'e Batim, that sometimes the Tzara'at is found on the walls of a person's house. It's a positive commandment in Parashat Mitzorah. The Pasuk says, Uba asher lo habayit v'higid lakohen lemor kanega ali babayit. The Pasuk is in Perek Yudalit, Pasuk Lamed He. The Pasuk is telling us that if somebody has a house and he sees that there's a spot on the wall and he cannot identify it, so he must come to the Kohen. And he tells the Kohen, Kanega. It looks like a nega in the bayit, and therefore the Kohen has to make a ruling. The Chinuch explains what is the reason behind why Negaim come on the house. And he comes along and he says that a Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't punish a person directly on his body first, but Olam gives him warning signs. Of course, he starts it on his walls of his house. If he makes teshuvah, then everything goes away. If he does not make teshuvah, then it becomes more severe. Then the negaim go on his garments, getting a little closer to home. If he makes teshuvah, they disappear. Everybody's fine. If he doesn't make teshuvah, now the most severe of the negaim goes on his body. So it's you see that even in the punishments of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's berahamim. But Yolam is not looking to punish the person. He's looking to wake the person up in order for him to make the shuvah. So he gives him signals. Of course, the signals have to become louder and louder if the person doesn't hear it, until ultimately he brings him back to the good. The second reason, he says, why Borei Olam brought Nik'ei Batim is because when the Jews came into Eretz Yisrael, the Amoraim, which were the inhabitants of Israel before they came in, took their treasures and they hid them behind the walls. Now, how are we going to detect that there's actually treasures behind these walls? So Kadosh Baruch Hu brings a nega on the wall. And Halakha says that when you see a nega that's confirmed, you have to knock the wall down. What ended up happening when they knocked the wall down? Sure enough, they found the treasures. Now, Kadosh Baruch Hu says the Chinuch could have, showed us these treasures in a different way. Maybe a prophet will come into the house and come along and say, behind this wall there's a treasure. Why do you have to do it in such a way? HaKadosh Baruch Hu likes to minimize the miracle. And therefore he says it's quite normal for people to do construction in their home. You knock a wall down over here, you make an extension over here. So it doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary. So while they're going to normal, let's say, maintenance of a home, so therefore they would find these things in the normal, natural way. Now, we discussed some of the laws regarding the Nig'e Batim. Number one, it has to be a certain size. And the shi'ur over here is at least two Niga'im that are next to each other, that are the shi'ur of two Girisim. Furthermore, there are three signs on Niga'im of the Bayit, the same signs that are on the Nig'e Adam. Number one, either if it turns a very dark green, that's called Yirakrak, or if it turns a deep red, that's called Adamdam, or if there's what's called Pisayon. Pisayon means it starts to spread from the beginning when it starts to appear. Furthermore, the law is that even if a person is a Hakam, and he knows and he studied the laws of Niga'im, and he knows them clear, only problem is he's not a Kohen. So even if Tamid Hakam must go to the Kohen and he must say, Kan Nega Nir'eli Babayit. Why can't he say nega? Because it's not up to a hakam to decide whether it's a nega or not. That's talui davka, only on the ruling of the kohen himself. Furthermore, there's an interesting law that says that a house that does not have windows does not subject to the laws of Nig'e Batim. Why? Because the kohen needs to see the nega. Okay, so there's two ways he can see the nega. Either from natural sunlight that comes through the windows, or he could bring a candle and look at the wall. But the pasuk says, "Kanega nir'a li," and the Gemara's doresh li velo leori. You're not allowed to use artificial light. It's got to be the natural light that's coming in from the windows. So therefore, if there's no windows, there is no Nig'e Batim. Furthermore, the house has to be a certain size. The Gemara tells us many times a minimum size of a bayit is 4 amot by 4 amot. It also has to have 4 walls, and it has to also be grounded. If you have a tree house, for example, that's not on the ground, it would not be subject to Nig'eh Batim as well. And it has to be made out of stone or wood. The Chinuch says that marble would not be considered a wall that would be subject to Nig'eh Batim. Furthermore, the halakha says that this law only applies in Eretz Yisrael. As the pasuk says, Bebet Eres Ahuzatchem, in the land that you inherit and divide. And then the Gemara says that even in Eretz Yisrael, it only applies to cities that were divided by the Shevatim. For example, Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, Lo Nechleka Nitchaleka LaShevatim. It was not divided to the tribes. And therefore, the halakha is the laws of Nig'eh Batim does not apply in the city of Yerushalayim. So again, Chutz La'aretz and Yerushalayim are exempt, but everywhere else in Eretz Yisrael is subject. Of course, this law applies to both male and female homeowners. Doesn't matter if it's a lady that owns the home, but of course it only applies when there are Kohanim that are experts in knowing how to make the rulings on Nig'eh, which we do not have today. And if somebody has Nig'eh Bayit and doesn't follow this procedure, he transgresses a positive commandment. Now there is a musar in this mitzvah that's worthy to point out to our members. The pasuk comes along and says, Kanega nir'eli. And our rabbis learn a musar over here, that even if something in life looks like it's bad, and the person comes along and says, this is a terrible situation, God forbid, if he's going through a difficult time, the Torah is coming to tell you, Borei Olam never brings nega. Everything is just kan nega. It looks like a nega, but everything is letovah. Kadosh Baruch Hu always is ultimately doing it for the person's benefit. So from our perspective, it's kenega. It looks like a nega, but the emunah comes and tells us that really the otiyot nega is the same otiyot as onig. That behind every nega there's an onig. There's a sweetness. There's a certain charm. And that's a tremendous musar. And that's why we learn in this mitzvah that the guy thought that he has to knock down his wall. And all of a sudden he finds out that he's a rich man because of it. Because behind the nega, there was actually a treasure. So that's not a nega, that's a kanega. He'd be very happy to take these negaim as well. And we learned from over here great musar. There was a case many years ago where there was a fellow that got caught and the police started to beat him up. And they gave him a court. It was on the video, it was all over the news, it ended up in the courts. And in the courtroom, they ended up ruling in the victim's favor, and they felt that he was being abused by the cops. And they gave him a settlement for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they calculated that for each makkah that he got was about $20,000 per makkah. So when they interviewed him on the way out of the courtroom, they said, what do you have to say? He says, I wish he would have kept on hitting me. Because if I would have known that each makkah is worth $20,000 in court, I could have been even richer than I am today. Which at the time, he says, I thought it was a nega, but now I realize it was kan nega. It was only like a nega. Actually, it was a blessing in disguise. And that's the truth when it comes to everything in life. Ki kasher yaser ish et beno. Adonai Elohecha miyasereka. The yisurin that Hashem brings to a person is like the yisurin that a father brings to his son. A father doesn't punish his son to hurt him or to abuse him. He punishes his son in order to put him in the straight and narrow. And that's the same thing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the great lesson of this mitzvah, that there's no such thing as nega. It's always kan nega. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.